All right, in this video, we're going to talk about some different categories that we are going to discuss as we are discussing kind of the different development levels of countries. So there are terms that we use in place of, sometimes you'll hear like the term first world countries or third world countries. This is generally the way that we are going to refer to countries, and that is as more developed countries, less developed countries, and developing countries. So we're going to talk about some characteristics of each of these. So we're going to start with more developed countries. So generally speaking, it is kind of what it sounds like, but I wanted to talk about some of the kind of characteristics of more developed countries, where they have high rates of economic prosperity and development. So we're going to be looking a lot at population statistics, and we'll see that these countries oftentimes rate really highly in things like the gross national income per capita, and some population statistics that are going to be indicators of development as well. They have low rates of people engaged in agriculture, lots and lots of people who are living in cities and urban areas as well. So those are kind of characteristics of more developed countries, as well as service-based economies. So kind of in this class, we'll talk about countries with lots of people in agriculture, lots of people in manufacturing, and lots of people in services. And more developed countries generally have a lot of people engaged in services. And generally speaking, these countries are more likely to be politically free than countries at sort of other levels of development, I would say. So the kind of country example that I have here is Canada. And I don't know where the picture's from, but I think that might be New York City. But Canada is the country example that I would give for a more developed country. All right, on the flip side of the coin, we have less developed countries. So you do see some economic growth in this country in terms of like the overall growth of the country. And we have seen a lot of really, really, really good things happening in what we would call less developed countries as it relates to population statistics and decreasing rates of things like infant mortality, and increasing rates of things like life expectancy. But you do still see high rates of poverty that remain sort of by sort of modern indicators. And generally, we would say these areas are characterized by having more rural than urban populations. And still are largely dependent on what we would call subsistence agriculture, which is a style of farming in which you're providing for yourself and your family and maybe at best sort of your local community. So subsistence farming is oftentimes a good way to get a sense that we're talking about a country that would fall into the less developed country category. And the example that I would give for this category is the country of Haiti. So you can see the Haitian flag here, as well as a few other images that are indicative of sort of a lack of development. All right, so we've done kind of the two opposite ends of the spectrum. So in the middle, we have what we would call developing countries. Also, another synonym would be newly industrializing countries. So in these countries, we actually do see large amounts of economic growth. Oftentimes, not oddly enough, I guess, it kind of makes sense when you think about it. But we see the most economic growth happening generally in countries that are in kind of this stage. You have lots and lots and lots and lots and lots going on in these countries. So within that, we have lots of rural to urban migration happening. So these countries are in the process of urbanization or people moving to cities. So you often see the growth of a lot of what we call like mega cities happening in developing countries. And you see a shift away from agriculture and subsistence agriculture specifically to more manufacturing and service-based jobs. So you sort of see the nature of the economy shift as well. And we are also going to talk about in this unit some of the shifts that we see happening with the overall population structure of a country. And many of those changes take place in the developing country category. So lots of changes happening in these countries. So Brazil is the example that I gave you for developing countries. All right, and here we can see spatially the distribution. I think this is from Wikipedia. Blue is more developed. So we see the major world regions that stand out as being more developed are North America, so the United States and Canada, kind of the United States and Canada part of North America, Western Europe, East Asia, so South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong as part of China, and then the region of Australia and New Zealand within Oceania. So that is the more developed category. Less developed, we see the countries in red. So sub-Saharan Africa stands out as the region of the world with the most people in the less developed country category. And as you can see, the kind of most countries fall somewhere in the middle in the developing country category. So looking at this another way, if we're going to look at it kind of as a scale or a continuum, which I think kind of sometimes gives you a more accurate view than three distinct categories. We have kind of the least developed countries in the world, many of which are in a specific part of sub-Saharan Africa. But then you kind of climb up the ladder of development. In the developing countries category, we would have countries that are like Brazil and Mexico and India and China. And different parts of China probably fall into different categories. And then in the more developed countries, you have kind of the regions that were in blue that we talked about before. And you can see some interesting examples of places kind of falling in between different stages too. All right, cool. Thanks.